Hey guys, tonight we drift back into the fog-thick streets of Victorian London, where the air smells faintly of coal smoke, damp brick, and the distant tang of horse manure. Gas lamps flicker weakly in the mist, and the soft clop of hooves fades down narrow lanes as the city slowly wakes. You're standing on a cobblestone street just as the first pale smear of dawn creeps over the rooftops. It looks picturesque from here, storybook almost, but don't let the quaint charm fool you. You probably wouldn't survive a week in this world, not without some serious luck and a stomach of iron. Hygiene, as we think of it today, barely exists here. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from tonight, and what time it is where you are. I love picturing all of us scattered across the globe sharing these strange journeys together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day begins early here. Even before the sun has fully risen, the city is stirring in a way you can feel in your bones, a muffled rhythm of footsteps, a groan of wagon wheels, a far-off hawker calling out his wares. You shuffle your way through the narrow alleys, your boots scraping over worn stones, slick with last night's drizzle, and perhaps something else less poetic. If you were one of London's working poor, you'd already be awake. Water had to be hauled, fires lit, and any hope of warmth coaxed from stubborn lumps of coal. There's no shower to stumble into, no toothbrush waiting by the sink. The Victorian morning wash is a ritual that would feel woefully inadequate to you. In a cramped back room, you find a young woman, perhaps a seamstress, splashing her face and neck from a porcelain basin no wider than a dinner plate. The water inside is cool, drawn from a jug on the washstand, and it will have to do for her entire morning routine. There's no running hot water. She pats her cheeks dry with a towel that's seen better days and combs her hair into a tidy bun, hiding yesterday's grease beneath the style. For teeth, if she's lucky, she might have a tin of tooth powder, chalky, sometimes mint-scented, but often little more than powdered chalk mixed with a pinch of soap. Many don't bother at all. Mouthwash. Forget it. In wealthier homes, things look slightly more refined, but not much cleaner. A lady's maid carries in a steaming jug from the kitchen, pours it into her mistress's basin, and stands ready with towels. These rituals are more about appearances than real sanitation. Most people bathe fully perhaps once a week, less in winter. Between baths, they rely on these quick sponge downs to keep the worst odors at bay. Perfumes and colognes mask what water and soap can't remove. The Victorian nose is used to a certain background scent of humanity that would make modern commuters squirm. Outside, the streets themselves tell their own unhygienic tale. The cobbles are never truly dry. Horses rule the roads here, and with thousands of them clattering over the city every day, their droppings mingle freely with the ever-present mud. Crossing sweepers, often ragged boys, earn a few pennies clearing a path for passing ladies and gentlemen. You'd want to thank them, but you'd also want to disinfect your shoes afterward, if such a thing were even possible. The Thames River snakes through the city, a broad, gray-green artery that once carried commerce and life. Now, in 1850s, London, it also carries something far less romantic: raw sewage, household waste, and the foul runoff from factories. The stench in summer is so bad it has a name, the Great Stink, and it seeps into everything: your clothes, your curtains, even your dreams. Drinking water is drawn from the same river downstream, only slightly filtered. Cholera outbreaks are common. Typhoid is a shadow in the alley. You quickly learn that here in this era, water is as dangerous as it is essential. You wander toward a public pump where a small crowd is gathered. A man in a wool cap fills his bucket, while a woman scolds her child for letting fingers trail in the water. The pump handle squeaks with each push, the iron worn smooth from countless hands. The water that splashes out looks clean enough, sparkling in the morning light. But you know it's a game of chance. Germ theory hasn't caught on yet. People still believe miasma's bad airs cause disease, so they worry more about foul smells than microscopic killers. You might hold your breath near an open sewer, but happily sip from a pump tainted by invisible bacteria. In homes without private privies, the toilet, if you can call it that, is often a simple chamber pot under the bed. In the morning, its contents are emptied into the street gutter or into the privy in the yard. The night soil men come after dark, carting away waste in barrels for disposal, far from respectable neighborhoods. You can imagine the smell. You can't imagine the health risk, at least not with 21st century knowledge screaming in your head. Yet this was life. Normal. Unremarkable. If you were a gentleman heading to work, your morning might include a shave at the barber's, his long blade scraping over your skin after a quick stropping. He might rinse it in a basin that's been used for a dozen customers before you. Towels reused all day. You'd step back out feeling fresh, never suspecting the risk of a small cut festering into something far worse. Soap exists, but it's harsh lye-based and not used as liberally as you'd think. Laundry day is a once-a-week ordeal, if that, and involves hauling water, boiling it over a fire, and scrubbing clothes by hand. Underclothes are worn several days in a row before washing. And yet amid all this, there's a certain strange order to the grime. People adapt. They learn to live with smells, to ignore the grit under their nails, to accept that city life means soot on your windowsill and coal dust in your lungs. You notice how hands are always busy, women beating rugs in the yard, men blacking boots until they gleam, children fetching water. Cleanliness here is relative, a matter of degrees and effort, not an absolute state. In richer districts, servants shoulder the dirtiest tasks. Maids empty chamber pots, scrub front steps, polish silver. Households display their respectability, not just in manners, but in how well they keep their stoops and door knockers gleaming. Even so, behind closed doors, the air can be thick with coal smoke, damp from unventilated rooms, and tinged with the sharp scent of paraffin lamps. Curtains are seldom washed. Mattresses, never. Bedbugs are an open secret. In the poorer quarters, there's less pretense. Families crowd into single rooms, cooking, eating, and sleeping within arm's reach of each other. Washing is done in tin tubs, often with reused water, and baths are communal affairs for the children. Soap is rationed carefully. The smell of frying onions might mingle with the tang of unwashed bodies and the sharp ammonia of chamber pots. These are not smells you forget. As you make your way back toward the main thoroughfare, you pass a small shop selling combs, hair oils, and tooth elixirs that promise sweet breath and sparkling smiles. The labels are ornate, the promises extravagant, but the actual ingredients are questionable. Powdered orris root camphor, and sometimes even chalk mixed with brandy. In an age before consumer safety laws, you take your chances. It's still early morning, but already the streets feel alive. Smoke rises from countless chimneys, blurring the rooftops in a soft haze. Market stalls unfold with creaks and clatters, spilling cabbage leaves and carrot tops onto the wet cobbles. A brewer's dray rumbles past its driver swaddled in a thick scarf against the chill. Life, messy and fragrant and fragile, carries on. You keep walking, following the scent of baking bread toward the promise of a warm crust in some dim cafe, your mind turning over the strange rituals of Victorian hygiene and wondering how much of it you could endure. The little cafe you find is narrow, its front windows fogged from the heat of the oven and the damp breath of early customers. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of yeast, strong tea, and damp wool. You shake off the mist from your coat, or if you're a Victorian Londoner, your heavy overcoat stiffened with years of wear and step onto creaking floorboards. The wooden counter is scrubbed daily, but the notion of disinfecting is unknown. The teacups are rinsed in hot water, sometimes with a splash of soda powder, but there's no guarantee of true cleanliness. Still, the warmth and the smell of fresh bread are enough to draw you in, enough to make you forget for a moment the grimy streets outside. Behind the counter, a woman in a faded dress pours steaming tea from a heavy pot into thick ceramic mugs. She doesn't wear gloves. Her fingers are chapped and raw from a lifetime of scrubbing. Her apron is stained from flour gravy and long hours. A pot of sugar sits nearby, its spoon resting in the granules. You notice several customers use the same spoon without a second thought, common practice. Germs are a foreign concept. People here fear visible dirt far more than unseen bacteria. A boy runs in with a tray of pies, steam rising from their cracked crusts. He's come straight from the bakehouse where flour hangs in the air, like morning mist, and settles in every corner. The baker's apron is white with dust, his hair and eyebrows powdered with it too. In such places, hygiene is a matter of tradition. Sweep the floor, wash the trays, wipe down the tables, but no one worries about the possibility that a rat might scurry over the shelves at night. In Victorian London, rats are as common as pigeons. The real art lies in keeping them just out of sight. You sit at a small wooden table, the varnish worn away in patches. The man beside you stirs his tea with a spoon, then casually lays it back on the table, leaving a damp ring. He wears a cravat tucked into a waistcoat, his collar faintly gray with use. In this world, clothing is an investment, not a disposable commodity. Even the middle class send shirts to the laundry only weekly, and collars and cuffs, detachable for easy washing, are scrubbed separately. Soap flakes are precious. Laundresses work themselves to exhaustion, boiling linens in great copper tubs, scrubbing them on washboards and wringing them dry by hand. Your crisp white shirt in the 21st century would be unthinkable luxury here. Out on the street again, the day has taken hold. The narrow lanes are bustling costermongers shouting over their barrows, apprentices sweeping the shop fronts, milkmaids carrying pails balanced on yokes across their shoulders. A rag-and-bone man trundles past, calling for cast-off clothes, broken furniture, anything to be repaired or resold. Waste is valuable in a city where most own little. Even worn-out soap ends can be melted down and remolded. Down a side street, you come upon a public bathhouse. These places are a blessing for those without access to private bathing facilities, meaning the vast majority of city dwellers. Inside, the tiled rooms are steamy, the air heavy with the smell of damp towels and soap. The water is heated in great boilers piped into a series of private cubicles or open pools. The bath attendant collects a small fee, provides you with a towel and a sliver of soap, and points you toward an available tub. Privacy varies. In poorer districts, you might share the space with several strangers. The water is often reused until it's too cloudy to bear making clean a relative term. Yet for many, a visit here is a treasured part of the week. The hot water eases aching muscles, the steam loosens the tightness in chests from the city's coal-smogged air. People linger chatting in low voices, or simply soaking in the rare warmth. You imagine the feeling of sinking into the bath, the heat stealing into your bones, the faint rasp of soap against skin that hasn't felt such luxury since last week's visit. In a life of endless work and cold rooms, this is bliss. The streets around the bathhouse are lined with shops selling brushes, soaps, hair oils, and patent medicines. Through one dusty window, you see rows of sanitary toothbrushes, stiff bristles set into carved bone handles. In another, bottles of tooth tincture, promised to preserve the gums and whiten the teeth. Many of these concoctions are more harmful than helpful, containing abrasives that strip enamel or acids that corrode it. But they are marketed with confidence, their labels adorned with flowing script and images of smiling ladies. Without regulation, truth is optional. You pass a barber's shop where a man is having his mustache waxed into neat points. The barber dips a comb into a jar of pomade, the same comb he's used on other clients today. The air smells of bay rum and the faint metallic tang of razors. In the corner, another man is having his boots polished until they gleam. Appearance matters in Victorian society, even if cleanliness is more about perception than science. A well-brushed coat and tidy hair can make you respectable even if your last full bath was 10 days ago. As you walk, you can't help but notice the smells and orchestra of odors playing out in every street. There's the sweet, sharp reek of manure, the damp mildew of rain-soaked walls, the tang of coal smoke drifting from chimney pots. A fishmonger's stall adds its salty, briny note. A butcher's shop contributes the heavy, coppery scent of raw meat. Mixed into it all is the ever-present human smell, sweat soap, hair oil, and the faint whiff of unwashed wool. To modern noses, it's overpowering. To Victorians, it's simply the smell of life. In the poorer quarters, the smells intensify. Here, refuse piles up faster than the scavengers can cart it away. Narrow courts and alleys trap stagnant air. Gutters carry sluggish trickles of waste toward the nearest drain, which is little more than a hole in the street. Children play barefoot in the muck, their shouts echoing between grimy brick walls. Washing lines are strung overhead, fluttering with shirts and sheets stiff with cold. Women scrub steps and stoops with buckets of gray water, trying to keep at least the entrance clean if nothing else. Respectability starts at the doorstep. You stop to watch a water cart making its rounds. The driver, a burly man in a battered bowler hat, hauls buckets from the tank on his wagon to refill household barrels. For those without a private pump, this is the only way to get fresh water, though. Fresh is a term you'd use loosely here. In summer, the barrels grow slimy. In winter, the water freezes solid. But it's water, and that's what matters. People store it carefully, covering the barrels with cloth to keep out dust and pests. Still, it's impossible to keep it truly pure. Turning into a more prosperous street, you notice the difference immediately. The pavements are cleaner, the shop fronts brighter. Here, housemaids sweep steps daily, polish brass knockers until they shine and chase away any ragged sweepers who linger too long. Dustmen collect the refuse more regularly, and the gutters are less clogged. Even the air smells fresher, though that's more about the absence of overwhelming stenches than the presence of any real cleanliness. You pass a delivery boy wheeling a barrow piled with coal sacks. Coal dust clings to his face and hair, blackening the creases of his skin. His hands are raw from lifting heavy sacks all day, and his clothes are permanently dust-stained. In most homes, coal fires are the heart of daily life. They heat water, warm rooms, and cook meals. But they also fill the air with soot that settles on every surface. In the evenings, maids dust the furniture and sweep the hearth. But by morning, the fine black powder is back again. You pause outside a chemist's shop, drawn by the scent of camphor and lavender. Inside shelves hold jars of powders and potions, some medicinal, others cosmetic. A glass case displays cakes of scented soap, violet rose, sandalwood luxuries for those who can afford them. Most people make do with plain brown soap, harsh on the skin, but effective on stubborn grime. The chemist sells disinfectants, 2-carbolic acid chloride of lime, but these are used sparingly, mostly in hospitals or during outbreaks of disease. In the average home, the closest thing to a disinfectant is strong soap and elbow grease. Leaving the shop, you feel the damp air cling to your skin again. Somewhere nearby, a church bell tolls the hour, its sound rolling over the rooftops. You glance toward the river hidden behind warehouses and alleys, knowing it carries the city's waste away and brings disease back in return. Life in Victorian London moves on regardless each day, a careful dance around dirt disease and the unspoken understanding that complete cleanliness is impossible here. You keep walking deeper into the city's living history, where every brick and cobblestone seems steeped in the scent and texture of the 19th century. The narrow lane ahead dips slightly, carrying you toward the river. The sound of water lapping against the stone embankment grows clearer, with each step mingling with the creak of wagon wheels on uneven stones and the rhythmic clop of hooves. Down here, close to the Thames, the air is thicker, heavier. It wraps around you, carrying a damp cold that seeps straight through your coat. This is the underbelly of Victorian London, an area where the river's presence is both lifeline and curse. Warehouses line the embankment, their windows clouded with grime, their doors yawning open, to reveal crates, barrels, and the shuffle of men in flat caps. Horses wait patiently outside, their breath forming pale clouds in the air. The street smells faintly of rope, wet wood, and tar, but also of rot. Somewhere just out of sight, refuse seeps into the water. You pause near a set of stone steps leading down to the river's edge. The tide is low, exposing a stretch of dark, glistening mud. In the shallows, you see a few figures bent over, poking at the muck with sticks. These are the mudlarks, men, women, and even children who comb the riverbed for anything of value. A scrap of coal, a bit of rope, a coin lost overboard. It all has worth here. They work in ragged clothes, hands raw from cold water, faces streaked with the same mud they sift. Hygiene for them is a luxury they cannot afford. When they're done, they'll rinse their finds in the same filthy river they've been wading through. Further along the embankment, a barge is unloading. Men heave sacks of flour onto the quay, their boots leaving deep imprints in the wet boards. The flour dust coats them head to toe, sticking to sweat, and grime turning their faces into ghostly masks. No one wears gloves, and the sacks themselves are patched with coarse stitches. Rats know this area well. Their nests are tucked into the shadows between barrels, their black eyes watching for scraps. Yet somehow the city lives with them. Rats are as inevitable here as the fog. You turn into a side alley where the paving stones are slick and uneven. The smell hits you first, an overwhelming sour stench of refuse, rotting vegetables, and something far worse. This is where one of the open sewers runs a sluggish channel covered in places by wooden planks, but open in others, its foul contents creeping toward the river. It's a constant reminder of what lies just beneath the surface of the city's daily life. Children dart across the planks without hesitation, chasing each other in a game of tag. You're left wondering how many times a misstep has ended in disaster. Not far from here is a public privy, a squat brick building with a narrow doorway. Inside, the air is thick and stale. The facilities are basic wooden seats over pits with lime sprinkled occasionally to mask the smell. There's no flushing mechanism, no running water. The place is cleaned irregularly, and the floor is damp in ways you'd rather not think about. Still, for many, this is an improvement over a chamber pot in a crowded room. Stepping back into the street, you pass a waterman carrying 2 heavy buckets suspended from a yoke across his shoulders. He's headed toward a row of houses where families will pay a penny for a delivery. The water sloshes dangerously close to the rim, and you can see bits of debris swirling inside. For the residents here, it's the best they'll get today. A few houses have cisterns on their roofs collecting rainwater, but that too is only as clean as the city's smoky air allows. As you climb away from the riverside, the fog begins to thin. The streets widen, lined now with small shops and workshops. In one doorway, a cooper is shaping staves for a barrel, the rhythmic tap of his hammer echoing down the street. His hands are black with pitch and sawdust, his apron stiff from weeks of work without a proper washing. In Victorian London, tradesman's clothing is as much a tool as it is a garment worn until it can no longer hold together, then patched until it finally falls apart. You duck into a narrow passage and find yourself in a small courtyard shared by several families. Washing hangs overhead, flapping limply in the damp air. Women kneel by wooden tubs, their sleeves rolled high, scrubbing clothes against ridged boards. The soap turns the water cloudy almost immediately, but they keep working, rinsing in a second tub and wringing the garments out by hand. The children hover nearby, some helping others simply watching with dull curiosity. When the washing is done, it's pegged to lines strung between windows. In winter, it may take days to dry. By then, the smell of damp will have settled deep into the fabric. You can hear a rhythmic scraping sound from one corner of the courtyard. An older man is seated on a low stool, sharpening a knife against a whetstone. Beside him, a tin basin filled with water reflects the pale sky. It's his shaving water, cold, of course, unless he takes the trouble to heat it over the fire. For most men, shaving is done quickly, almost carelessly. A nick here and there is just part of the process. Cuts are dabbed with a bit of alum, or sometimes simply ignored. Infection is a risk no one fully understands. In the doorway of one small room, a young mother sits on a chair, a baby on her lap. She's running a fine-toothed comb through the child's hair, inspecting closely. Head lice are a common problem here, and combing is one of the few defenses. You watch as she methodically works through the tangles, the baby squirming, but mostly patient. A basin of water at her feet holds the evidence, tiny pale specks floating on the surface. She tips it away into the gutter when she's done, then wipes the comb on her skirt. Life here is a constant battle with such small but persistent enemies. Moving on, you come across a street vendor selling hot eels from a steaming pot. He ladles portions into shallow bowls, the broth cloudy and fragrant with vinegar. His hands, reddened from the steam, are not exactly clean. Still, his customers seem unconcerned. Street food is cheap, filling, and best eaten quickly before it cools. Beside him, another vendor sells baked potatoes from a small handcart, their skins split and steaming. The air smells briefly delicious before the wind shifts and brings the sharper scents of the city back again. A little further along, a small group gathers outside a newspaper stand. The headlines shout about a recent outbreak of disease in one of the poorer districts. The vendor shrugs as he hands over papers, as though such news is nothing unusual, which sadly it isn't. Outbreaks flare and fade with grim regularity. They are as much a part of city life as market day or the tolling of the church bell. You stop for a moment to watch a sweep's boy climb down from a chimney. His face is blackened, his clothes thick with soot. He coughs hard, a dry, rattling sound that seems too heavy for such a small frame. He wipes his hands on his trousers, leaving pale streaks where the sweat has cut through the grime. For him, the day's work is done, though the soot will cling to his skin for days. Baths are rare for boys like him. Sometimes a quick wash in a tin basin is the best they can manage. The street curves and leads you past a row of small shops, a cobbler bent over his last, a seamstress stitching in the window, a chandler pouring molten tallow into molds. In each, the smell of their trade lingers leather and glue cloth and starch hot wax. These smells cling to the workers, becoming part of them, part of how they are recognized by their neighbors. Clean or not, every trade has its own perfume. By the time you reach the next main road, the city feels fully awake. Carriages rattle past their wheels, splashing through puddles left by last night's rain. Gentlemen stride along the pavement, umbrellas tucked under their arms. Ladies step carefully, their skirts lifted just enough to clear the wet. Boot scrapers stand ready at the entrance to better houses, a silent acknowledgement that the streets outside will never truly be clean. You pause, taking it all in, the smells, the sounds, the damp air against your face. In this moment, you realize that Victorian hygiene isn't just about soap and water. It's about how people move through their days, adapting to a world where dirt is inevitable and cleanliness is fleeting. It's about resilience, habit, and the unspoken agreement that everyone is doing the best they can with what they have. And with that thought, you step back into the moving stream of the city. The traffic along this broader street is livelier than in the cramped alleys you've just left. Omnibuses lumber past their upper decks, crowded with passengers huddled under scarves. The smell of wet wool drifts down from above as horses strain at the traces, hooves striking sparks on the slick cobblestones. A handsome cab rattles by its driver, hunched forward against the damp air. Behind you, the chiming of a shop doorbell rings out as someone ducks inside for warmth. In Victorian London, even on a day without rain, the streets feel damp, the kind of damp that lingers in your clothes, your hair, your bones. You pass a tobacconist's shop. Inside, the air is a thick, fragrant haze. The shopkeeper's hands are stained with the deep brown of tobacco leaf, and his counters are dusted with fine flecks of it. In this world, the smell of smoke is part of the everyday fabric of life, seeping into curtains, hair, and clothing. Tobacco smoke mingles with the ever-present coal smoke in a way that feels almost comforting to those who live here. The idea of purging one's home of lingering scents would seem laughably modern. On the corner, a woman in a dark cloak tends to a stall selling lavender water hair pomade and scented soaps. She pours a drop of lavender water onto a square of fabric, holding it up for a customer to inhale. The scent is sweet, sharp, and fleeting, a little pocket of freshness in the midst of the city's odors. These perfumed touches are not just luxuries, but shields. They help mask the unavoidable smells of the day, the tang of unwashed bodies in crowded omnibuses, the metallic whiff of the butcher's shop, the rank dampness of the river fog. A few doors down, you pass a sanitary goods store. Its window displays gleam with polished metal bedpans, enamel-lined wash basins, and soap dishes in matching sets. A proud sign proclaims the virtues of modern plumbing. Inside, a salesman demonstrates a flushing water closet, still a novelty in many homes. The device is noisy, a small gush of water tumbling into the porcelain bowl. But in a city where chamber pots and privies dominate, it's a marvel. Customers lean in to inspect the mechanism, murmuring approval. Of course, only the well-to-do can afford such conveniences. In poorer neighborhoods, water closets are rare, and most remain dependent on shared privies or the night soilmen. Walking further, you reach a small park, one of the few open spaces where the city's soot and grime loosen their grip. The gravel paths are damp underfoot, bordered by winter-bare trees. A gardener in a wool cap is raking leaves into piles. His hands are calloused and reddened by the cold. Around the paths, a few benches host bundled-up figures, nurses with prams, an elderly man feeding pigeons. The air here smells faintly of earth and wet wood rather than coal smoke. But even in the park, the haze of the city is never far. Your breath still carries the faint taste of soot. In one corner of the park stands a public drinking fountain. It's a tall, ornate column of cast iron with a small spout trickling water into a basin. People cup their hands to drink or dip a tin mug that hangs from a chain. The water runs clear, sparkling in the muted light, but you know from experience that appearances can be deceiving. The fountain is connected to the city's mains, an unpredictable mix of river water, rainwater, and whatever else the pipes collect. Still, in a time before bottled water, this is as good as it gets outside the home. Leaving the park, you step into a quieter street lined with terraced houses. Here, the difference between classes is written in the steps and windows. Well-kept homes have scrubbed doorsteps, shining brass knockers, and lace curtains. Others show peeling paint, grime-streaked glass, and uneven brickwork. Behind every door is a different approach to hygiene. In wealthier homes, a housemaid might sweep and dust each morning, carrying ash buckets from the fireplace to the yard. In poorer homes, sweeping is done when time allows, and ashes might pile up in the hearth until the next fire is laid. Through an open doorway, you glimpse a scullery, an unheated back room where washing up is done. A woman in a plain dress stands over a deep stone sink, sleeves rolled up scrubbing dishes in cloudy water. There's no running hot water. She heats a kettle on the stove and pours it in to take the chill off. Soap is rationed carefully, too much is wasteful, and dishes are rinsed in the same basin. The floor is damp underfoot, with a scattering of potato peelings and stray drops from the sink. The scullery may be the beating heart of household hygiene, but it's far from spotless. A few streets away, you pass a row of school children walking 2 by 2, their boots clattering in unison. Their faces are clean, at least for the morning, but their cuffs are frayed and their coats are shiny with wear. Schoolhouses make some attempt at maintaining hygiene basins for washing hands, maybe a bar of soap on a string, but the water is often cold and the soap reduced to a sliver. Illness passes easily through classrooms. Teachers keep windows cracked for fresh air when the weather allows, believing that a good draft will ward off sickness. It's a fragile hope in the face of reality. You follow the children toward a market street. Stalls are set up in neat rows, offering everything from vegetables and eggs to pots and tinware. The air is alive with voices, hawkers calling prices, customers bargaining, children darting between stalls. The fishmonger works bare-handed, gutting and filleting with practiced ease. The butcher's counter is piled with joints of meat, a faint steam rising from their fresh surfaces in the chill air. Flies are fewer in winter, but in summer they'd be everywhere. Sellers shoo them with rags, but the battle is constant. In a corner of the market, a woman sells second-hand clothes. She shakes out each garment for inspection, brushing away dust. These clothes have lived other lives before their fabrics worn soft, their linings faintly scented with soap or with the musty smell of long storage. Buyers check seams and hems, making sure they'll survive another season. In an age when fabric is dear, buying new is rare. Washing and mending are acts of survival. Across the way, a street preacher stands on a small wooden crate railing against the moral decay of the city. His voice rises and falls in the crisp air, carrying across the market. He warns of vice, of sin, of disease as a punishment. Passers-by listen for a moment, then move on. Moral cleanliness and physical cleanliness are often linked in Victorian minds. A neat appearance suggests moral uprightness, a slovenly one moral weakness. It's an idea as much social as it is sanitary. By midday, the light has shifted. The streets seem busier now, more urgent. Workers on short breaks hurry toward pie shops and tea rooms. The smell of baking drifts from doorways, mixing with the sharper tang of the greengrocer's stall. A dust cart rattles past, collecting household refuse. The men wear heavy leather gloves, though not to protect against germs, they're meant to keep out splinters and cuts from broken crockery. The refuse goes to dumps on the outskirts of the city, where it will smolder slowly, sending another plume of smoke into the already crowded sky. The crowd carries you onward until you find yourself back in a narrower street. Here the air feels thicker, the buildings leaning in close as though conspiring to trap the damp. Laundry hangs overhead, dripping into the street below. A woman empties a bucket of gray water into the gutter, sending a trickle weaving toward the nearest drain. Somewhere nearby, a baby is crying. Somewhere else, a man is whistling tunelessly as he saws wood. Life hums on in its quiet, stubborn way. In these moments, you begin to see how hygiene in the Victorian era was never just about washing. It was about living within the limits of the age. People balanced the knowledge they had with the resources they could reach. Clean water was a blessing, but never assumed pure. Soap was precious and sometimes replaced with sand or ash. Fresh air was a cure-all, even if it carried the city's soot. Every choice was a negotiation with the grime that lingered at the edges of life. And as you step onward deeper into the maze of streets, you know that every turn will reveal another layer of that constant, quiet negotiation. The street narrows again, bending gently between rows of brick buildings that seem to lean toward each other for warmth. Here the light struggles to reach the cobblestones even at midday. A lamplighter is making his rounds even though the lamps won't be needed for hours yet. He pauses beneath an iron post, reaching up with his long pole to check the glass and trim the wick. His hands are darkened from years of soot and oil, the cuffs of his coat stiff from repeated exposure to lamp fuel. In another age, you might think of him as an artisan of light. Here, he's simply another man making his living in the half-shadow of the city. A narrow doorway opens onto a chandler's shop, and the smell hits you before you even see inside, hot, tallow-heavy and fatty mixed with the faint sweetness of beeswax. Inside rows of candles stand to attention like pale soldiers. The floor is covered in a thin layer of hardened drips, giving it a faintly waxy sheen. The chandler's apron is stiff with accumulated spills. His fingernails carry the same faint grease as the candles he handles. Hygiene here is measured in how well you keep the mice from nibbling the stock, not in whether your hands are freshly washed. Further along, a seamstress sits by a window in a cramped upstairs room. You glance up to see her bent over her work, her hair tucked into a faded kerchief, her shoulders hunched from hours at the needle. Her small table is strewn with scraps of fabric, spools of thread, and a chipped teacup with a thin ring of milk scum at the bottom. She'll likely drink from it again without washing. It's simply what people do. In a home without running water, every basin fill has to be hauled up the stairs, so dishes are done in batches, if at all. You follow the curve of the street to a small courtyard where a water pump stands, its handle polished smooth by countless hands. Two women are talking as they fill their pails, their conversation punctuated by the rhythmic squeak of the pump handle. One wears a shawl pulled tight against the chill, the other a battered bonnet that's seen better days. Their skirts are damp at the hem from the puddles beneath their feet. The water splashes into the pails, cold and clear, but you've learned better than to trust appearances. Germ theory hasn't yet taken hold here. No one thinks twice about drinking water drawn from a pump, just yards away from a privy. From the courtyard, you wander into a lane crowded with small shops, cobblers, tinsmiths, and herbalists. Outside one doorway, bundles of dried herbs hang from a beam, swaying gently. The herbalist, a woman with quick eyes and an ink smudge on her cheek, weighs out a measure of dried chamomile blossoms on a brass scale. She talks of their calming properties, their ability to soothe the stomach and help with sleep. Her shop smells of earth lavender and something sharper, perhaps pennyroyal or peppermint. In this city, herbs are as much a part of hygiene as soap or water. A scented sachet in your pocket might mask your scent, and a sprig of rosemary pinned to your coat is believed to ward off illness. The lane leads you to a public house, its doorway propped open to let out the heat and the smell of beer. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of hops, wood smoke, and damp wool. The floor is sticky underfoot, the tables wiped clean, but never truly spotless. Tankards are rinsed in a shared basin, sometimes in water that hasn't been changed for hours. Yet the customers seem content, laughing over their pints, trading gossip. In an age before refrigeration, beer is often safer to drink than water. It's boiled in the brewing process after all. You take in the warmth, the flicker of the fire, the camaraderie, knowing that here at least the dangers are of a slower sort. Back outside, you pass a row of costermongers selling apples from wooden crates. The fruit is mottled and irregular, some bearing small bruises. A boy bites into one without washing it, juice running down his chin. No one scolds him. In a world without pesticides, an apple straight from the crate is considered wholesome enough. The costermongers call their prices in sing-song voices, tossing a spare apple to a passing child, slipping an extra into the basket of a favored customer. You stop at a shoeblack's stand. The boy working there is no more than 12, but his hands are deft, his brushes moving with practiced precision. He buffs your boots until they gleam, wiping away not just the mud, but the fine layer of soot that clings to every surface in the city. His cloth is already dark with the morning's work, but he folds it to a cleaner side for you. For a penny, your boots look respectable again, at least until your next step into the street. The smells of the city shift as the day stretches on. A fish stall releases the briny tang of the sea, mingled with the sharp scent of vinegar from the pickle vendor nearby. From somewhere unseen comes the warm, yeasty breath of baking bread. These scents fight a constant battle against the underlying bass note of the city's grime, the damp wool, the coal smoke, the lingering hint of waste. It's a battle no one wins for long. You drift into another residential street, this one quieter, its residents at work. Here, doorsteps have been scrubbed that morning, the wet stone catching the light. In open windows, you can see rooms that are neat, if not spotless, fireplaces, swept rugs, beaten and laid flat again. In one window, a housemaid polishes a silver teapot until she can see her reflection. Her cloth leaves a faint streak of black on her apron, a reminder that even beauty here comes with a layer of soot. Turning a corner, you come upon a ragged parade of children playing in the gutter. They've fashioned a ball from rags tied with string, kicking it back and forth across the narrow street. Their laughter rings clear, rising above the occasional shout from a nearby shop. Their clothes are patched and mismatched, their hair untidy, but their faces are bright. In a world where soap is scarce and baths scarcer, their health depends less on cleanliness than on resilience. From somewhere close by comes the rhythmic thud of a rug beater. You follow the sound to a back alley, where a woman stands with a carp draped over a wooden frame. She swings the beater in wide arcs, sending clouds of dust into the cold air. It's a thankless task. The dust will settle again tomorrow. But for today, the carpet will be a little cleaner, the air in the room a little fresher. She coughs into her sleeve, her breath making small white clouds that drift away on the wind. You find yourself near a laundry yard, the smell of hot soap and wet cloth drifting over the fence. Inside, women work in pairs, scrubbing shirts on washboards, lifting them into steaming tubs, then wringing them out with practiced force. Their arms are red and raw from the hot water, their aprons soaked through. Wet sheets hang in neat rows, dripping steadily into the packed dirt below. Here, cleanliness is hard-won, paid for with aching backs and chapped skin. The women talk as they work, their voices rising and falling like the rhythm of the wash. As the afternoon wears on, the light shifts, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The lamplighter you saw earlier will be back soon, moving from post to post in the gathering dusk. By evening, the fog will thicken again, wrapping the city in its damp, familiar cloak. Fires will be lit in grates, kettles will sing, and wash basins will be filled for the nightly rinse. The city's great balancing act between filth and cleanliness will begin again, just as it does every day. And you, still wandering through its streets, can feel how deeply hygiene, or the lack of it, is woven into the rhythm of Victorian life. It is not merely a question of washing one's hands or scrubbing a floor. It is a negotiation between necessity and possibility, between the ideals of respectability and the stubborn facts of the age. Evening is still a couple of hours away, but the city has begun its slow pivot from the business of day to the business of night. You turn down a narrow lane where the buildings crowd in tightly, their upper floors leaning just far enough to block the sky. Lamps have been lit inside, spilling yellow light across the cobblestones in soft rectangles. Through one open window, you hear the creak of a rocking chair and the low murmur of voices. The smell of coal smoke hangs heavier now, curling around you like an old wool scarf, scratchy, inescapable. You follow the sound of clinking glass and low laughter to a small tavern tucked between two leaning houses. Inside, the warmth is immediate, wrapping itself around you in a way that feels almost like safety. But it's also thick with smells, spilled beer, that's soaked into the wooden floorboards for years, the sharp tang of pipe smoke, the faint sourness of damp coats hanging by the door. In one corner, a man uses the same pewter mug he's likely been handed dozens of times before. Between uses, the mugs are dunked into a tub of water that's gone cloudy by the end of the night. No one thinks twice about it. At a table near the fire, a group of dock workers are finishing bowls of eel pie. They lean back, wiping their mouths with the backs of their hands, leaving streaks of gravy that will dry and flake by morning. Soap is for Saturday nights, maybe Sunday morning, if there's church to attend. The rest of the week, grime and sweat are worn like badges of a day's labor. The tavern keeper brings another round, without a word, sliding the tankards across the scarred wood. You step back into the street and follow it until the smell changes, less smoke, more salt. You're nearing the fish market. Even at this hour, it's a hive of activity. Gas lights cast shimmering reflections on the wet cobbles, turning the market into a flickering tunnel of gold and shadow. The fishmongers work quickly, their knives flashing in the lamplight, as they gut and clean the day's catch. Water from the cleaning tables runs into shallow channels that lead straight into the gutter, carrying with it the tang of brine and scales. By morning, the smell will linger long after the market is gone. Past the fish market, you enter a warren of tiny back streets, where the buildings seem to breathe with their inhabitants. Laundry flaps overhead, though it's unlikely to dry in the damp night air. Behind one door, you hear the sound of a baby crying. Behind another, the rattle of a tin bath being dragged into the kitchen. In many homes, evening is the only time for a proper wash, especially if water has been fetched fresh that day. The tin bath is filled by kettle after kettle, each one carried from the stove with care. The first bather gets the hottest water. By the time it reaches the last child, it's tepid at best. In wealthier homes, the evening wash is more genteel. A housemaid carries a jug of steaming water up the back stairs to her mistress's room, pouring it into a porcelain basin. Here, the sponge bath is a refined ritual: face, hands, arms, neck, and perhaps a quick swipe at the feet. The water is perfumed with a few drops of lavender or rose, both to soothe the skin and to mask any lingering odors. The towels are crisp and neatly folded, the soap carved into elegant ovals. But even in such comfort, a full bath is still a rare indulgence, perhaps weekly in winter, twice weekly in summer. You drift further down the lane and find yourself near a public washhouse. Its large windows glow warmly against the darkening street. Inside, rows of wooden benches hold women scrubbing laundry in deep stone sinks, their arms red from the effort. Steam curls upward, fogging the glass. The air is heavy with the scent of soap flakes and damp linen. A few older children sit off to the side, mending socks by candlelight, while they wait for their mothers to finish. These public washhouses are a blessing for families who cannot manage the labor or the space at home, though the work is still hard and the queues can be long. As you walk, you notice the gutters growing livelier. Wastewater pours from household drains, dishwater gray with grease suds from a late evening scrub or something less pleasant. The runoff wins its way toward the nearest drain, which is often clogged with straw leaves and other debris. On damp nights like this, the smell lingers close to the ground, wrapping itself around your ankles as you pass. A faint ringing of bells catches your ear, and you see a rag and bone man pushing his cart along the street. He calls out for bones, rags, metal scraps, anything that can be resold or recycled. His hands are black with grime, his coat patched with fabrics from a dozen other coats. He stops to speak with a woman carrying a small bundle of old clothes. In exchange, he offers her a few pennies and a promise to take the bundle off her hands. These scraps will find new lifecloth for paper-making, bones for glue, metal for melting down. In this city, nothing is truly waste until it can no longer be repurposed. The night air grows colder as you reach a small square where a street vendor is roasting chestnuts over a brazier. The smell is warm, sweet, and earthy, drawing people in from the edges of the square. His hands are stained with soot from tending the coals, his apron a patchwork of burn marks and grease stains. He serves the chestnuts in paper twists, torn from old newspapers, the print smudging onto your fingers. No one minds, the warmth is worth it. Beyond the square, you come upon a narrow passage leading to a yard. Here, several families share a single outdoor privy, a wooden shed over a deep pit, with a door that swings loosely on its hinges. The ground is wet from the day's rain, the smell unmistakable even before you step closer. In winter, these privies are brutal places, the cold biting through layers of wool. Lime is thrown into the pit occasionally to keep the odor down, but it's a losing battle. For those without access to even this chamber pots remain the only option, their contents emptied into the gutter in the early morning hours. You keep moving, following the sound of a barrel organ playing a waltz somewhere ahead. A small crowd has gathered around the organ grinder, some humming along, others clapping in time. A few children dance awkwardly, their faces bright in the lamplight. In moments like this, the city feels softer, its edges blurred by music and laughter. But even here in the glow of the street lamp, you can see the truth in the worn boots, the frayed cuffs, the soot-marked cheeks. Hygiene is never far from your thoughts. In Victorian London, it is the constant background hum beneath every sight, sound, and smell. Finally, you find yourself at the edge of the market district again, where traders are packing up for the night. Crates are stacked, carts are loaded, and the day's unsold goods are either taken home or left for the scavengers. The cobbles are wet with meltwater from fish stalls, trampled cabbage leaves, and the inevitable muddy slurry of the street. A woman sweeps her patch of pavement with quick, practiced strokes, pushing the day's debris into the gutter. The broom leaves faint, damp trails in its wake, but the street will never truly be clean, not until the next hard rain. As you pause here, breathing in the mingled scents of smoke, cooking, and damp stone, you realize you've spent the entire day walking through the rhythms of Victorian cleanliness. From dawn's chilly basin splashes to the evening's steam-filled washhouses, every moment has been shaped by the tools, habits, and limits of the age. And tomorrow, it will all begin again exactly the same in this unending dance between filth and the fragile hope of keeping it at bay. The night has fully taken hold now, and the city hums in its own peculiar key. Gas lamps glow in uneven rows along the main streets, their light pooling in golden puddles that dissolve into shadow. You walk beneath them, your footsteps muffled on the damp cobblestones. Somewhere behind you, a carriage rattles past its lamps, bouncing with each jolt. The air is heavier now, rich with coal smoke and the faint metallic scent of frost that's beginning to creep into the night. You slip into a quieter side street where the lamps are fewer and the shadows longer. A cat darts across your path, vanishing into a doorway before you can catch the gleam of its eyes. The buildings here seem to lean together more closely, as though conspiring to keep secrets. You catch a glimpse of domestic life through curtained windows, the glow of a fire in one parlor, the flicker of a candle in another. A woman bends over a cradle, her hands moving gently. In the next room, a man hangs a coat near the fire to dry. It is the city's private face, one you rarely see from the main thoroughfares. Inside these homes, the nightly rituals of cleanliness are unfolding. In many, a basin stands on a washstand half filled with water drawn earlier in the evening. A cloth is dipped, wrung out, and run over hands, face, neck, and arms. In smaller households, the same basin may serve the whole family, the water growing cloudier with each turn. Soap, if used, is applied sparingly. Towels are used for days before being washed. Freshening up before bed is less about removing all dirt than about taking the edge off the day's grime. In wealthier homes, the ritual is more elaborate. Servants carry in fresh hot water, drawing it from kettles kept near the kitchen fire. Silver-backed brushes are used to smooth hair. Fine soaps with scents of violet or almond leave a faint trace on the skin. Nightgowns are changed, more often sheets, perhaps weekly. But even here, the air is thick with the day's residue coal dust that has slipped in around window frames, faint smells from the scullery drifting upward, the soft musk of wool blankets, worn night after night. Out on the street again, you pass a baker's shop with its shutters partly closed. Inside, the baker is already at work for tomorrow, sleeves rolled to the elbow, forearms dusted in flour. The warm, yeasty smell spills into the cold air, mixing with the faint, acrid tang of the coal stove. His apron is stiff with old flour dust, his nails rimmed in gray. He doesn't stop to wash between every task. Flour and dough are part of him, now worked deep into the lines of his hands. Cleanliness here is practical wash. The mixing bowls sweep the flour from the counter, but don't waste water on what the day's work will undo in minutes. Further along, a charwoman emerges from a shop doorway, locking it behind her. She carries a pail of dirty water to the gutter and tips it out, the soapy gray stream winding toward the nearest drain. Her skirts are damp at the hem, her hands raw from lye soap. She wipes them on her apron before hoisting the empty pail and disappearing into the dark. Her work will begin again at first light, scrubbing away the city's footprints from the day before. You turn a corner into a mew's narrow lanes behind the grander houses where the stables and coach houses sit. Here, grooms are bedding down the horses for the night. The air is thick with the sweet, sharp smell of hay and manure. Stalls are mucked out fresh straw, laid water buckets filled. Boots crunch and the straw tools clink against stone. The grooms' coats are dusted with chaff. Their hands, calloused and cracked, smell faintly of horse and saddle soap. Cleanliness here is about the animal's comfort as much as the human's. A healthy horse is a working horse. In one corner of the mews you find a small pump, its spout dripping steadily into a shallow stone trough. A stable boy splashes his face in it, gasping at the cold, then runs wet hands through his hair. It's as much washing as he'll get tonight. He wipes his face on his sleeve and goes back to work. In these back streets, you realize hygiene is woven into the rhythm of labor. It happens when there's a moment to spare, not as a separate ritual. Leaving the mews, you walk toward a busier street again. The sound of a street sweeper's broom reaches you before you see him. He's a wiry man with a back bent from years of stooping his broom, whisking rhythmically across the cobbles. The sweepers work long into the night, clearing the day's mud straw, and refuse into piles for the carts. But there's only so much they can do. By morning, the streets will already be on their way back to the same state. Near a corner lamp, a group of children huddles around a brazier, their breath puffing white in the cold. Their clothes are thin, their hands chapped and red. One is holding a crust of bread. Another picks at the remains of a meat pie. They are street children, and for them, cleanliness is a luxury beyond reach. The wind lifts a lock of hair from one girl's face, and you see the fine dust clinging to her skin, the small streaks of soot beneath her eyes. They chatter softly, stamping their feet to keep warm. You follow the glow of more lamps to the edge of a small square where a vendor is selling roasted potatoes. The skins split with steam as he serves them in twists of paper, the warmth soaking into your hands. His cart is old, the brass fittings dulled with years of grease and smoke. Still, the food is hot and the queue is steady. In a city where a hot meal isn't guaranteed, even a potato feels like comfort. Beyond the square, you pass a row of lodging houses. Behind one open door, you glimpse a narrow hallway lined with boots and coats. The air inside is heavy with the mingled smells of too many bodies, too much damp wool, and too little fresh air. Upstairs, rooms are crammed with beds, sometimes just a mattress on the floor. Privacy is scarce, and the idea of personal hygiene is shaped by what the shared facilities allow. A single washroom might serve dozens of lodgers. Hot water is a rare treat. Further along, you find a street where the shutters are closed tight. The faint light that seeps through their cracks glows with the steadiness of home life at rest. Inside, you imagine families gathered close to the fire, the day's dirt settling invisibly into the folds of clothes, the fibers of rugs, the air itself. Tomorrow, much of it will still be there, softened by routine and familiarity until it's barely noticed. Cleanliness in this age isn't about eradicating every speck. It's about keeping what you can within bounds. As you walk, you feel the weight of the city's rhythm settling into you. The pattern repeats itself everywhere the days work. The brief evening rituals of washing and tidying, the slow surrender to the night. In wealthier homes, there may be a freshened collar or a brushed coat. In poorer ones, perhaps just a wiped face and hands before bed. But across all of Victorian London, there's an unspoken understanding that tomorrow will bring the same cycle: fresh dirt, fresh effort, fresh negotiation between what can be cleaned and what must simply be endured. And so you keep walking, letting the lamplight lead you deeper into this endless night of small labors and quiet compromises. The air grows colder as you drift further from the main thoroughfares, your breath trailing in pale ribbons before your face. Somewhere ahead, you hear the clop of a solitary horse echoing in the stillness. You follow the sound until it fades into a narrow street where the lamps burn lower, their mantles sputtering gently. The light here is softer, its edges blurred by the fog that seeps upward from the Thames. In this muted glow, you pass a row of shuttered shops. Their signs swing gently overhead, creaking on their hinges. A pawnbroker's 3 brass balls gleam faintly, a reminder that tomorrow the door will open again to customers exchanging heirlooms for cash. Beside it, a barber's pole turns lazily in the night air, its red and white stripes catching the lamplight. Inside, the chairs are empty, but the faint smell of bay rum lingers, a trace of the day's shaves and haircuts. Brushes, combs, and razors lie in neat rows on the counter, waiting for the morning. None of them have been sterilized in the way you might expect. They'll simply be wiped down and put back into service. A little further on, you pass a small bakery with its back door open to the night. The warmth spills out in a soft wave, carrying with it the comforting scent of rising dough. A baker stands at a wide wooden table, kneading with heavy rhythmic pushes of his hands. His sleeves are rolled high, his skin dusted white with flour. The table is scrubbed, but scarred from years of use. The same cloth that wipes the counter might also wipe the sweat from his brow. In a world without germ theory, such things are not cause for alarm. The bread will be baked hot, and that is reassurance enough. You pause outside a low-roofed building whose windows are steamed from within. This is a public washhouse still lit despite the late hour. Inside, women scrub clothes in long stone troughs, their hands red and rough from the hot, soapy water. A few children doze on benches, their heads resting against bundled laundry. Steam curls upward into the rafters, carrying the faint perfume of soap flakes, mixed with the sharper scent of damp wool. The room hums with quiet determination. These women know that clean clothes don't just keep a family healthy, they also signal respectability, a vital currency in a city where appearances matter. Back in the street, you hear the soft rattle of wheels on cobblestones. A covered cart rolls past the driver hunched low in his seat. This is one of the night soil men making his rounds while most of the city sleeps. His job is to collect the waste from household privies and carry it away to be disposed of beyond the city limits. The smell follows him down the street, mingling with the more general perfume of the night. His work is essential but unglamorous, and few will meet his eye as he passes. You turn toward the river where the fog thickens, and the sounds sharpen the distant slap of water against stone, the hollow creak of a moored boat shifting in its berth. Here the air is colder, still laced with the faint metallic tang of the water. A watchman makes his slow circuit along the embankment, his lantern swinging in his hand. He nods as you pass, his breath visible in the glow. His coat is long and heavy, its hem stiff with damp from the fog. On his belt hangs a truncheon polished from years of handling. Hygiene is far from his mind. His work is to keep watch, not to keep clean. Along the quay, you see the outline of a fishmonger's stall. It's been cleared for the night, but a few crates remain stacked to one side, their wooden slats damp with the day's meltwater. A cat prowls near them, hoping for scraps. In the gutter nearby, water trickles sluggishly toward the river, carrying with it the mingled remnants of the day's trade. The smell is faint but distinct, a reminder that the Thames receives more than just rain. Leaving the river behind, you make your way into a narrow passage where the light barely reaches the ground. The walls here are damp to the touch, their brick darkened by years of moisture. You pass a door that stands slightly ajar, spilling warm light into the gloom. Inside, a family sits around a small table eating bread and cheese. The children's faces are clean for the moment, their hair smoothed flat. Their mother has clearly made the effort to give them this brief illusion of order before bed. Later, they'll climb into a shared bed under blankets that carry the day's sense of coal and kitchen smoke. Further along, you come upon a stable yard, where a groom is currying a horse by lantern light. His strokes are slow and methodical, lifting dust from the animal's coat. The smell of horse hay and saddle leather is strong but not unpleasant. He pauses to check the animal's hooves, scraping away mud and stones. This too is a form of hygiene, one aimed at keeping the animal healthy and fit for the work ahead. The groom's own clothes, meanwhile, are thick with dust and hair. His hands will stay stained no matter how much he washes them tonight. The night deepens, and you notice how the sounds have changed. The day's clatter has given way to the soft hiss of gas lamps, the occasional clink of a latch, the muffled voices of those still out and about. A figure passes you on the pavement, head down, coat collar turned up. The faint smell of tobacco follows him, then fades. You reach a crossroads where a coffee stall is still doing business. Its lantern throws a circle of light on the pavement, illuminating a large urn that sends up curls of steam. The stallholder pours coffee into heavy mugs, the liquid dark and strong. A few early morning workers, costermongers, cab drivers warm their hands on the cups. They sip slowly, their breath mingling with the steam. The mugs are rinsed in a bucket of water that's grown cloudy from repeated use. Here, warmth matters more than perfect cleanliness. Across the street, a constable stands beneath a lamp, his notebook in hand. His boots are polished, but not spotless. The day's mud has dried in the creases. He watches the street with steady eyes, nodding occasionally to passers-by. His uniform carries the faint smell of wool and pipe smoke, a familiar and oddly reassuring scent in the cold night air. As you continue walking, you realize that Victorian London at night is no cleaner than it is by day, only quieter. The dirt remains softened by darkness, but not erased. In every house, on every street, there are traces of the day's labor: coal dust on the mantle, soot in the lungs, grit in the seams of clothes. And yet, there is also a sense of pause, a lull in the city's endless cycle of work and washing. It's the closest thing to stillness you'll find here. You pass under one more row of gas lamps, the light trembling faintly in the fog. Ahead, the street narrows again, drawing you back toward the maze of alleys where the city's hum is a little softer, its breath a little warmer. You walk on, carrying with you the smells, the textures, and the quiet, stubborn resilience that make up the fabric of life in this era. And tomorrow, the cycle will begin again. By the time you find yourself deep in the warren of side streets again, the city has entered the quietest part of the night. Even the stray cats have found warmer corners. You walk past rows of terraced houses, their shutters drawn, their doors bolted. The only light is the occasional flicker of a dying hearth glimpsed through a cracked curtain. The air smells faintly of damp stone with just a whisper of smoke still hanging from earlier fires. You pause beside a doorway where a tin basin rests on the step. It's been left out to collect rainwater, and already a thin film floats on the surface, bits of soot, a stray leaf, maybe the feather of a passing bird. This water will be boiled before drinking, if it's used for drinking at all. More likely, it will be poured into a wash basin come morning, the grit settling at the bottom to be ignored. Moving on, you step over a shallow gutter, where a thin trickle of gray water snakes toward the drain. It carries with it the day's small leavings, bits of ash soap suds, maybe the faint metallic sheen of coal dust. In some quarters of London, this is as close as the streets come to washing. A good hard rain is the city's only thorough cleaner. At the end of the street, you turn into a narrow passage where the buildings huddle so closely overhead that they blot out the sky entirely. The air here feels different, warmer, more humid, trapped between the walls. The smell is thicker too. Food sweat, damp fabric. Somewhere above you, a baby cries its wail muffled by the layers of brick and wood. In one window, a woman leans out to shake crumbs from a cloth. They flutter down to the cobblestones below, where a rat noses at them almost immediately. In the lower quarters of the city, the boundary between public and private life is thin. Washing is done in sight of the street, whether it's dishes set on the sill to dry or shirts pegged to a line strung across an alley. Chamber pots are emptied discreetly if possible, but sometimes with a splash into the gutter when no one is looking. The idea of privacy around such acts is a luxury reserved for those with more space, more plumbing, and more servants. As you emerge from the alley, the space opens into a small courtyard shared by several families. Here, a single water pump stands at the center, its handle shining from years of use. A few tin cups hang from nails in the post, rattling softly in the night air. You imagine the morning rush here, the pump squeaking buckets, clanking voices calling across windows to remind children to fetch water before school. The same pump will serve for cooking, washing, scrubbing floors, and sometimes for drinking. A bucket spilled means another trip, no matter the weather. You skirt the courtyard and follow a cobbled path toward the faint glow of a street lamp. The smell changes as you go, less human, more animal. You're nearing a cluster of stables. Even at this hour, there's activity. A groom is bedding down the last of the horses, his boots muffled in the straw. He moves with quiet efficiency, his lantern throwing warm, circular light. The smell here is sharp, but somehow clean in its own way, hay leather, and the warm musk of the animals themselves. The straw will be changed regularly, the stalls mucked out daily. It's more than can be said for many human lodgings nearby. Beyond the stables lies a small row of workshops, most of them shuttered for the night. One is a cooper's, the scent of fresh-cut oak still clinging to the air. Another is a wheelwright's, where the smell of linseed oil seeps from the cracks in the door. These trades have their own kinds of cleanliness, not sterile, but ordered, organized, free from the chaos of household dirt. Tools are kept sharp, workbenches swept of shavings. It's a different philosophy of tidiness rooted in practicality rather than polish. You pass a lamplighter on his final round, his tall ladder balanced easily on his shoulder. He stops to adjust the flame in one sputtering lamp, trimming the wick before lowering the glass back into place. The faint smell of singed oil drifts on the air as you walk past. These lamps will burn until dawn, their warm glow softening the hard edges of the city. The street ahead slopes gently downward toward the river, and as you follow it, the smell of damp stone and brine grows stronger. The Thames at night is both beautiful and unsettling. The water moves with a slow, heavy rhythm, catching the light from the few lamps along the embankment. You lean on the cold stone wall for a moment, looking out across the dark expanse. Somewhere upstream, barges are still moving their lanterns, bobbing like fireflies. The water carries the day's debris, floating wood scraps of rope, perhaps worse. Victorian Londoners drink from this same river, often downstream of their own waste. The thought is enough to turn your stomach. From the embankment, you follow a narrow stair down to the water's edge. The mudflats glisten faintly in the lamplight, slick with the tide. Here you might find a mudlark picking through the muck even at this hour, searching for coal, dropped from a barge, or a lost coin worked loose from the silt. The smell is overwhelming, a blend of rot salt and something sourer. You don't linger. Climbing back to the street, you head into another warren of alleys, this one darker than the rest. Your footsteps sound different here, the ground beneath you softer with accumulated grime. It's in streets like these that the city's poorest huddle in damp rooms, sometimes whole families in a single bed. Washing here might be no more than a quick splash from a jug laundry, a monthly event if water and soap can be spared. You pass a lodging house where the door stands ajar, letting out a wave of heat thick with the smells of unwashed bodies, cooking grease and damp wool. In the narrow hall, boots and shoes lie scattered, their leather cracking from long use. Upstairs, you hear the creak of beds and the low murmur of voices. This is the unvarnished end of the hygiene spectrum, where survival comes first, and cleanliness waits its turn. The alley spills you back onto a busier road, where a coffee stall glows under a canvas awning. A costermonger leans on the counter, sipping from a chipped mug. The stall holder wipes the rim with a rag before filling it for the next customer. Beside the urn sits a plate of buns uncovered to the air. They're warm, fragrant, and will be eaten without hesitation. In this world, trust is built on familiarity, not inspection. Somewhere beyond the stalls, a church bell strikes the hour. Its sound rolls over the rooftops, marking another small turn in the night's slow wheel. You glance up and catch the faint glimmer of stars through a break in the fog. It's rare to see them here. The smoke from thousands of chimneys usually hides them. For a moment, the city feels softer, its grime and its struggles tucked away under a blanket of night. And yet you know that beneath that blanket, the same negotiations between filth and order continue. Even in sleep, the city is preparing for tomorrow's cycle coal to be delivered. Water to be drawn, streets to be swept, faces to be washed, however briefly. It is a rhythm as steady as the tide. You keep walking, letting that rhythm guide you onward through the sleeping city. The road you've been following bends gently, guiding you past a row of dim shop fronts where the painted letters are just visible in the lamplight. A chemist's sign swings faintly in the breeze, its hinges squeaking. Behind the darkened windows, rows of bottles wait silently, their contents both remedy and risk. Laudanum in delicate glass vials, camphor, spirit, carbolic soap. These are the medicines and disinfectants of the day. Some will heal. Others will simply smell strong enough to feel as though they might. Next to the chemist is a small ironmonger's shop. Its window filled with buckets, coal scuttles, and gleaming brass taps. In the doorway sits a large enamel-lined footbath, the sort that might see use in a wealthier home's kitchen or scullery. The enamel is clean but chipped along the rim, revealing the dull iron beneath. You can picture it filled with steaming water for a rare soak, the heat seeping into cold, numbed toes. For most people in the city, such luxury is reserved for the sick or the newly returned from a hard day's labor. Crossing the street, you pass a watchman standing beneath a lamppost. His cloak falls in heavy folds, the hem flecked with mud from his rounds. In his hand, a small whistle dangles from a leather cord, ready to summon help if needed. He watches you with the calm, measuring gaze of a man used to weighing strangers. His breath forms pale clouds that dissipate quickly in the damp air. Hygiene is the furthest thing from his mind. His task tonight is to keep the peace, not to keep his coat spotless. Beyond him, the road dips toward a cluster of market buildings. By day, this place is a roar of activity. Now it is half asleep, its goods packed away behind shuttered doors. Still, a few stalls linger in the edges of lamplight, selling hot drinks or late-night bread. You pass one where the stallholder is wrapping fresh rolls in squares of brown paper. His hands are dusted with flour. He brushes them absently on his apron before handling the coins. No one here is counting the germs, warmth, and food matter more than invisible risks. You follow the smell of smoke to a brazier set up in a sheltered corner. A man turns chestnuts slowly over the coals, their shells darkening and splitting to reveal the pale nut inside. He serves them in twists of newspaper, the ink smudging your fingertips as you hold them. The warmth is immediate, the taste earthy and sweet. Around you, others hunch close to the brazier, their faces flushed from the heat. In a city where the night air can seep into your bones, such small umferwarts outweigh the thought of soot-blackened hands. Further on, a faint metallic clink draws your attention to a narrow doorway. Here, a cobbler works late by lamplight, bent over a half-finished boot. The smell of leather and beeswax drifts into the street. His tools are arranged neatly on a worn cloth, each one darkened by years of handling. His own boots are spattered with polish and glue. He'll work until the piece before him is finished, then perhaps step outside to throw the last scraps into the gutter. Cleaning his tools comes later, if at all. In a trade like his, wear is a badge of skill. The road curves again, leading you past a row of boarding houses. Curtains twitch as you pass. Faint voices murmur inside. In one doorway, a woman stands rinsing a rag in a small basin, wringing it out with strong hands. She wipes the door frame, the windowsill, the front step, little gestures that keep the threshold looking cared for. In neighborhoods like this, a clean stoop signals pride and watchfulness, even if the rooms beyond are cramped and worn. Respectability starts where the world can see it. You glance upward as you walk. Washing lines stretch between upper windows, heavy with damp laundry that will smell faintly of coal smoke even once dry. Sheets billow gently in the breeze, their edges brushing the walls. Somewhere above a window creaks open, and a pair of hands shake crumbs from a cloth. They drift downward like pale snow, joining the soft grit already underfoot. At the end of the road, you step into a broader street, lit more generously by gas lamps. The pavements are slick with the night's mist. Here, a few handsome cabs still rattle past their drivers, hunched low in their greatcoats. Hooves clatter on the cobbles, followed by the faint hiss of wheels through puddles. The horse's breath clouds the air before dispersing into the cold. Each hoof leaves behind a small mark in the day's damp filth, a reminder that the streets are never truly clean, only briefly washed by rain. You find yourself passing a public house, spilling golden light onto the pavement. Inside, voices rise and fall, mugs clink. A fiddle scrapes somewhere near the fire. The floorboards are dark with age, and a faint stickiness clings beneath your boots. Here, shared cups are common, and spilt beer is simply left to soak into the wood. The warmth is welcome, though. You linger for a moment before moving on. Down the street, you spot a figure bent over a small cart. He's a knife grinder, turning the wheel with one hand, while the other guides the blade against the spinning stone. Sparks flare briefly, reflected in his eyes. The air smells faintly of scorched metal. His apron is stiff with filings and grit, his fingers blackened from the work. For him, cleanliness is measured in sharpness, not in soap. The blades will be wiped, not washed, before being handed back to their owners. As you continue, the houses grow smaller, the air thicker with the smell of many chimneys burning together. Here the windows are small and clouded. Curtains are yellowed from smoke. In one narrow lane, you see a boy carrying a sloshing bucket of water up the steps to his family's door. His boots are caked with mud, his trousers patched at the knee. He pauses to shift the bucket's weight, water slopping over his hands. Tomorrow the same bucket might serve for washing, scrubbing, or cooking. Its cleanliness will be judged by sight alone. The lane spills you into a tiny square where a single lamp burns in the center. Beneath it, a water trough gleams faintly. A horse drinks noisily, its breath steaming in the cold. Beside the trough, a man in a battered coat kneels to fill his can. He dips a tin mug into the trough, drinks deeply, then wipes his mouth on his sleeve. You can almost hear the 21st century part of your mind protesting, but here, this is simply life. From the square, you follow a narrow cut-through back toward the river. The air grows damper, the smells sharper. Somewhere ahead, the Thames moves in its slow, patient way. The faint lapping against stone seems to echo through the night. The river carries not just water, but the day's story, soot refuse fish scales, breadcrumbs, soap bubbles, and all the invisible matter that drifts downstream. In the Victorian mind, it is still a source of life, not a hazard to be feared. You stand for a moment at the embankment, leaning on the cold stone, looking out at the black surface broken only by the glint of a passing lantern on a barge. The tide draws it all away, or so it seems. But you know that in a few hours, the city will wake and the cycle will begin again. The water will be drawn, the basins filled, the hands washed, the floors scrubbed, each act part of a ritual, as ingrained as the stones under your feet. And as you turn back toward the lamplit streets, you feel that rhythm settling into you too. The lamplight seems warmer as you move back into the narrower streets, though the air is still damp enough to bead on your coat. You pass under an overhanging sign for a baker's guild, its paint faded but still proud. Somewhere inside, ovens are already glowing for the morning's first loaves. The thought of that heat makes you more aware of the chill creeping into your hands. You flex your fingers as you walk, the faint ache of cold settling into your knuckles. In one doorway, a housemaid kneels with a small pail and a stiff bristled brush. She scrubs the step with a kind of tired determination, each stroke loosening a little more of the day's grime. The water is already turning gray, but she tips it down the gutter without a pause and dips the brush again. This is a nightly ritual in better-kept streets. The threshold must be respectable, even if the rooms beyond are less so. To passers-by, a scrubbed step speaks of order, diligence, and pride. Beyond her, a small news vendor is packing up his remaining papers. He slaps them into a neat pile, the pages smudged from countless hands. Ink rubs off onto his fingertips, leaving faint shadows under his nails. There is no thought of washing them before heading home. The ink will wear away in time. He tucks the papers under his arm, the day's news folding into the city's constant cycle of comings and goings. At the next corner, you hear the slow, rhythmic creak of a handcart. It's a rag picker pushing his way through the darkened streets in search of anything salvageable. His cart rattles with odds and ends, broken chairs, scraps of cloth, bent metal. The smell is a blend of damp wood dust and something faintly sour. The man's coat is patched so many times it's hard to tell the original color. His work is dirty, but it keeps the streets from drowning entirely in their own leavings. You turn into a slightly wider street where the buildings rise higher. Curtains glow dimly behind a few windows. You catch sight of silhouettes, someone leaning over a table, another figure stirring a pot. The smells drift down to you, onions softening in fat, fresh bread cooling on a counter, the sharper tang of coal smoke rolling in from the chimneys. In this hour, the city feels briefly domestic, its vast sprawl reduced to hundreds of small, private worlds. Halfway down the street, a door opens and a man steps out carrying a dented enamel basin. He tips it into the gutter, sending a wash of soapy water down toward the drain. It leaves a pale trail in its wake, breaking apart as it meets the uneven cobbles. The smell is faintly perfumed lavender maybe, or rose water, something added to mask the underlying scent of lye. Inside his home, the evening wash has just finished, hands and faces rinsed, maybe a quick scrub of feet before bed. On the far side of the street, a group of young men emerge from a public house. Their laughter echoes off the brick walls, carrying a note of warmth in the cold air. Their boots strike the cobblestones with heavy, uneven beats. One pulls his scarf tighter, another takes a final gulp from a pewter mug, before handing it back through the open door. The mug will be given a quick rinse in the shared basin, and used again before the night is over. As you leave the busier street behind the houses, grow smaller, their paint more weather-worn. Here, laundry still hangs outside at night, shirts stiffening in the cold, sheets heavy with damp. A few windows are cracked open, just enough to let out a thread of steam from cooking pots or drying clothes. The air smells faintly of boiled cabbage coal tar and the lingering smoke from oil lamps. A narrow alley leads you to a row of washhouses, their brick walls streaked with soot. Inside you hear the muffled clang of a bucket against stone, the soft slosh of water being poured. A woman appears in the doorway, her sleeves rolled high, her hair pulled back under a kerchief. She carries a basket of wet laundry, its weight shifting heavily against her hip. The water still drips from the bottom, leaving a dotted trail along the path. She'll hang it indoors to dry overnight, the damp mingling with the warmth of the stove. You pause at a street pump where a single lantern hangs above the handle. The pump stands alone now, but by morning there will be a small crowd, women with pails, children sent to fetch water before school. Its iron surface is worn smooth by thousands of hands. Tonight, the water dribbles into the trough below, catching the lantern light in its ripples. It looks clean enough, though you know its purity is an illusion. Downstream, the river still receives the day's waste without discrimination. A little further on, you come upon a farrier's shop. The forge is quiet now, but the smell of hot iron lingers mixed with the earthy scent of horses. Tools are lined neatly on a bench inside their metal darkened by heat. The floor is scattered with iron filings that glint faintly in the lantern light. Cleanliness here is measured in order, not in polish. The tools will be brushed off before the next day's work, not scrubbed. The road slopes down again, and you catch a whiff of the river before you see it. The smell is less sharp at night, but it still carries a sour undercurrent. You reach the embankment and lean against the cold stone. Out on the black water, the lights of a barge drift slowly past its lantern, swaying with the movement. Somewhere along the opposite bank, a dog barks, the sound carried clearly in the damp air. Turning away from the river, you pass a line of warehouses. The cobbles here are slick, the air thick with the smell of stored grain, hemp rope, and oil. A watchman emerges from one doorway, lantern in hand. He nods in greeting before continuing his slow patrol. His boots leave wet prints behind him, quickly swallowed by the dark. You cut through another alley, where the walls are so close your shoulders nearly brush them. Here the ground is littered with bits of straw and paper flattened by passing feet. The faint drip of water comes from somewhere above, echoing softly in the enclosed space. You emerge into a courtyard shared by several small houses. In the center stands a stone trough, its surface slick with moss. A few tin cups hang from nails hammered into the wall, waiting for morning. By now, the city feels as though it has exhaled. The last stragglers hurry home, collars turned up against the cold. Doors close, latches click. Lamps burn steadily in their glass cases, casting soft halos on the pavement. The grime of the day is still here under your boots, clinging to your coat, but it no longer feels urgent. The night has wrapped itself around it, softening the edges until morning comes to stir it all up again. And tomorrow, like every day in Victorian London, the rituals will begin anew. Water-fetched basins filled steps, scrubbed hands, rinsed. The great compromise between dirt and dignity will continue as it always has, written into the rhythm of the streets. The air is colder now, sharp enough to prickle your cheeks. Somewhere high above the night sky is trying to break through the haze a faint scattering of stars, peeking between the drifting coils of chimney smoke. You follow a street where the lamps stand farther apart, their light dimmer, their reflections stretching long and thin across the slick cobbles. Every so often, a curtain stirs in an upper window, revealing a fleeting glow of lamplight before settling again. You pass a narrow yard where the faint clatter of tin breaks the quiet. A man crouches near a row of buckets, stacking them neatly after emptying their contents into a covered cart. He works without hurry, without waste. This is the night's unheralded labor, the tidying up that makes the morning bearable. His boots leave prints in the soft mud, their edges crumbling as you step past. The smell here is a mingling of wet earth soap water and something faintly metallic. Further along the quiet is broken by the rhythmic scraping of a broom on stone. A street sweeper works in slow arcs, pushing damp straw and bits of refuse toward the gutter. His hat is pulled low, his coat shiny from years of weather. He pauses to rest his hands on the broom handle, glancing up as you pass, then goes back to work. These night cleanings are never enough to chase the grime away, only to nudge it back for a few hours. A side alley draws you toward the sound of trickling water. At its end, a narrow brick arch frames a small public pump. It's been left running, just a slow dribble pooling in a shallow trough. The water catches the weak light from a single lantern fixed to the wall above its glow, trembling with each ripple. A tin mug dangles from a chain beside it, ready for the first thirsty hand come morning. You can picture the small cluster that will form here, shawls pulled tight, boots wet from the walk, voices muffled by the cold. Crossing back into a busier lane, you find yourself at the edge of a small market square. The stalls are shuttered now, their awnings tied down, but the smell of the day's trade still lingers. Fish onions, damp wood, a ghost of warm bread. A stray dog noses at the boards of a greengrocer's stall, searching for scraps. The paving stones are stained here and there from produce bruised and left behind. The smell is richer than it should be for winter, as though the air itself remembers the press of bodies and the crush of cabbages underfoot. You follow the curve of the square to a row of shop fronts. One window still glows faintly from within a barber's. The chairs stand empty, the brushes and combs arranged in neat rows on the counter. A faint scent of bay rum and hair oil lingers in the still air. The mirrors reflect the lamplight from outside in small fractured pieces. Tomorrow the place will hum again, razors dipped in basins of reused water towels hung to dry between shaves, the day's work layered on top of the day before. Past the barber's, you catch the sweet, almost cloying scent of a confectioner's shop. Its window is dark, but the air still holds a trace of boiled sugar, perhaps from sweets being poured earlier in the evening. A few streaks of it glisten faintly on the inside of the glass, catching the lamplight. Even the neatest shops cannot entirely keep the city's dust out. It drifts in with each opened door, settling on jars and counters alike. Turning onto a quieter street, you spot a faint glimmer of light spilling from a basement window. Peering down, you see a scullery in motion. A woman is bent over a large sink, her arms deep in gray water. Dishes are stacked on the counter ready for rinsing. A kettle rattles gently on the stove, steam curling toward the low ceiling. The floor is damp and scattered with vegetable peelings. It's not spotless, but it's alive with the work of keeping a household turning. The sound of plates clinking softly in the water follows you as you walk on. In the next block, you pass a row of public houses. Most are closing for the night, their doors propped open to let out the heat and noise. You catch glimpses of last patrons draining their mugs, of landlords wiping down counters with cloths already heavy from the day's spills. The floors dark with beer and age will get only a cursory sweeping before tomorrow's trade begins anew. The smell, beer smoke, and damp wool will remain woven into the grain of the wood itself. You skirt a narrow passage that leads to the rear of the buildings. Here the air is heavier, the smells more concentrated. Coal bins sit open under the eaves, their edges dusted with fine black powder. Barrels stand in uneven rows, some banded in rust. In one corner, a stack of firewood leans against the wall, its bark littering the ground. This is the city's backstage, the work areas where practicality comes before presentation. Returning to the street, you pass a small window glowing with the warm orange light of a fire. Inside, a man sits on a low stool polishing a pair of boots. His movements are slow, methodical. The rag in his hand is dark with polish, his fingers stained to match. A kettle hangs over the fire, steam puffing from its spout. On a nearby table, a half-full basin sits beside a folded towel, ready perhaps for a last wash before sleep. Beyond him, the road opens briefly onto a modest square lined with terraced houses. Here the steps are cleaner, the brass knockers brighter. In one doorway, a girl is shaking out a mat, sending a thin cloud of dust into the night air. She pauses to rub her hands together for warmth, then ducks back inside. In streets like this, the appearance of cleanliness is carefully maintained. It's as much a statement as a practice. Crossing the square, you come to a pump where the stone around its base is worn smooth from years of boots. It stands silent now, but by sunrise its squeak will carry through the cold air as water splashes into waiting pails. The nearby drain is already clogged with the day's sweepings, bits of straw paper and ash, forming a dark mat that will only partly yield to the morning's rush. A faint glow leads you into another alley, this one narrower still. Here laundry lines crisscross above your head, the cloth hanging stiff in the cold. Shirts and undergarments sway slightly in the breeze, their shadows shifting across the walls. The air is tinged with the faint scent of soap, a freshness that stands out against the city's usual palette of smells. These lines, strung high and taut, are one of the few visible signs of the quiet battle for cleanliness fought in every home. The alley spills you back onto a road that runs toward the river. The smell of damp and salt rides on the breeze stronger with each step. In the distance you hear the low, steady lap of water against stone. Somewhere beyond, barges creak in their moorings, their ropes groaning softly with the tide. You can almost picture the river's surface glinting faintly under the weight of fog carrying with it the day's invisible cargo. And even here in the deep quiet of night, you feel the truth of the city's rhythm grime settling into the seams of streets and clothes, small acts of washing and sweeping, pushing it back just far enough to keep life moving. Tomorrow's light will reveal the same endless compromise between the dirt that belongs to the city and the dignity that belongs to its people. The cobblestones are slick with a fine mist now, each lamp's reflection stretching like a golden ribbon under your feet. You head toward the sound of faint laughter somewhere ahead, the quiet broken by the occasional clatter of a distant cartwheel. In the hush of this hour, even small sounds seem to carry. You turn a corner and find a cluster of night workers gathered around a street brazier. Their coats are patched and heavy, their hands cupped around mugs that steam in the cold air. The brazier's glow paints their faces in shades of orange and shadow. The smell of coal smoke wraps around you, underpinned by something sweet from whatever's heating on the coals. The mugs will be shared between friends, rinsed quickly in a bucket of water before being passed along. In this hour, warmth matters more than caution. Past them, a faint scraping sound draws your eyes downward to a crossing sweeper stationed at the mouth of a lane. Even at night, he's at work, pushing away the small drifts of mud and refuse that gather at the curbs. His broom is worn, the bristles flared, but it still does its job. The work isn't glamorous, few notice, unless the crossing is particularly filthy, but it earns him coins enough to keep a roof over his head. He pauses briefly to tip his cap, then bends again to his slow, deliberate sweeping. You follow the lane to a row of small workshops. Most are dark, but a faint light glows through the shutters of a bootmaker's shop. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of leather and tallow. The bootmaker sits hunched over a half-finished sole, his hands moving with practiced ease. Scraps of leather litter the floor. A small pile of worn boots waits to be mended. On his bench sits a tin of polish, a stiff brush, and a rag dark with use. The tools are cared for, though never truly clean in the modern sense. They're meant to serve, not to shine. Further along, you pass a public house in the act of closing. The landlord props the door open to let the last patrons out, a warm rush of beer-scented air spilling into the street. Inside, a barmaid wipes down the counter with a cloth already soaked through, leaving faint streaks behind. Tankards are stacked haphazardly in a deep basin of murky water to be given a quick rinse before tomorrow's trade. The wood of the floor creaks under the weight of years of spills, swept clean only enough to clear away the day's visible debris. You turn away from the busier lane into a quieter court. Here, a row of narrow houses faces inward toward a central pump. The pump stands silent now, a tin cup hanging from its chain. In the morning, the court will be alive with voices and clattering pails, but for now, it rests under the fog-softened glow of a single lamp. The cobbles are wet, where water has splashed during the evening, forming dark patches that glimmer faintly underfoot. A movement at one doorway catches your eye, a woman shaking out a damp rag into the gutter. She wrings it once more, drapes it over the sill, and disappears inside. The faint smell of soap drifts after her, quickly swallowed by the heavier scent of coal smoke. These are the small, constant gestures of keeping a home in this city: wipe, rinse, wring, repeat. No one act makes the place clean, but together they keep the grime from winning entirely. Beyond the court, you find a narrow alley where laundry lines stretch overhead in crisscrossing patterns. Even in the dim light, you can see shirts and undergarments hanging stiff in the cold, their shapes ghost-like in the drifting mist. Some carry a faint scent of soap, others the stubborn trace of smoke from drying too near the fire. The lines sag slightly under the weight, and drops fall at intervals onto the cobbles below. You emerge onto a street where a few shops remain lit. One is a small chandler's, the window crowded with candles in neat pyramids. Inside, the air is a rich mix of wax and smoke. The shopkeeper moves slowly about, straightening the display for morning. His apron bears the marks of his trade, dark smudges, where wax has cooled pale streaks from candle trimmings. In his world, cleanliness is about keeping dust off the candles and mice out of the stock. Anything else is a matter for the home. A few doors down, a confectioner works late in his kitchen. Through the open window drifts the unmistakable scent of boiled sugar. Copper pans gleam faintly in the firelight, their surfaces filmed with a thin sheen from hours of cooking. A cooling slab holds rows of sweets in tidy lines. He moves with an easy rhythm, dipping, pouring, cutting. The air is sweet, but carries a faint undercurrent of soot from the coal fire that fuels his pans. The street eventually narrows toward the river again, and you catch the low rush of water. Here the smell sharpens salt and damp wood mingled with the sour edge of refuse. A lone figure stands on the embankment lantern at his feet, hauling in a rope from the water. He's a lighter man working a small barge moored close to shore. His coat is damp at the hem, his hands raw from the cold water. He moves steadily without hurry. The smell of wet rope clings to him, a scent as much a part of his work as the creak of the barge. Turning away, you pass a row of warehouses. A watchman steps out from one lantern swinging at his side. He gives you a brief nod before continuing his circuit, the light casting long shadows over the crates stacked by the wall. His boots scuff against the cobbles, the sound swallowed quickly by the fog. Somewhere beyond, a dog barks twice, then falls silent. In the stillness, you begin to notice the layers of the city's night hygiene, not the grand scrubbing of daylight, but the quiet, continuous tending. Rags shaken into gutters, basins emptied, floors swept just enough to last until morning, laundry hung in the cold to dry slowly overnight. These are not acts of transformation, but of holding the line, keeping disorder from spilling too far into the next day. You take one more turn and find yourself back in a busier lane. A coffee stall glows under a canvas shelter, its urn sending up curls of steam. A costermonger leans against the counter, his boots muddy, his coat dusted with straw. He nods in greeting as you pass. The mugs are lined up on the counter, their rims chipped but clean enough by the standards of the hour. Each one will see use by more than one pair of hands before the night is through. Somewhere nearby, a church bell tolls softly, the sound muffled by the fog. The hour slips past without urgency. The city breathes slowly now, wrapped in its blanket of mist and smoke. Beneath it all, the quiet rhythm of its cleaning and its clutter continues unbroken as it has for generations. And you keep walking the lamplight, guiding you forward through the still living night. The lane ahead curves gently, leading you away from the busier thoroughfares and back into a quieter pocket of the city. The fog clings more thickly here, gathering around the bases of lampposts and curling upward like ghostly fingers. The lamps themselves burn with a steady hiss, their light bending and stretching in the mist. Your footsteps sound softer now, absorbed by the damp in the stones. A narrow shop catches your eye, its window dim but still lit, revealing shelves lined with jars and boxes. It's a small herbalist's, the kind that sells dried roots, scented oils, and odd-shaped lozenges promising to cure all manner of ailments. Inside, the shopkeeper moves slowly, dusting the shelves with a cloth that's seen many days of use. The air is thick with the scent of dried lavender camphor and something sharper peppermint, or pennyroyal perhaps. In this age, scent is as much about reassurance as cleanliness. To walk into a space that smells strongly of herbs feels like stepping into a place that can keep illness at bay. A few doors down, you pass a tiny bakehouse with its shutters half drawn. Through the narrow gap, you see a man bent over a counter shaping loaves with practiced hands. His apron is white at the front, but darkened with flour dust that settled into the folds over many days. A wooden trough of dough sits nearby, covered with a damp cloth. The smell is warm, yeasty, and comforting, strong enough to seep into the street despite the damp air. In this work, the notion of hygiene is simple keep the pests away, sweep the flour from the floor, and trust the heat of the oven to do the rest. The lane narrows until the buildings seem to press in on you. Above washing lines crisscross between windows, heavy with damp clothes. Drops fall at random, pattering softly onto the cobbles. One line holds only stockings, pairs of all sizes, swaying gently in the breeze like a strange woolen garland. Somewhere overhead you hear the faint scrape of a window being propped open. A pale arm appears, shaking crumbs from a cloth into the street below. This mingling of private and public life is constant. The air and the street are shared spaces for better or worse. You follow the lane until it spills into a modest square where a single pump stands at its center. The stone around its base is slick from countless spillovers. A bucket sits nearby, turned upside down to keep out the rain. In the stillness, you can picture the square in daylight, women calling to one another as they wait their turn, children running with tin cups, the pumps squeak echoing against the brick walls. The same water will serve for tea, for washing, for scrubbing the floors. It will be heated in kettles, poured into basins, ladled into baths. And when it's gone, another trip to the pump will begin the cycle again. On the far side of the square, a seamstress's workshop glows faintly through the window. Inside, a woman works by lamplight, her head bent over a garment in her lap. Bolts of fabric are stacked neatly along the wall, their colors muted in the dim glow. A tin of pins rests open beside her, the metal catching the light as she moves. The air inside is likely close and warm, carrying the scent of fabric and the faint tang of machine oil. She will work late into the night, the rhythm of her sewing blending with the city's quiet pulse. Leaving the square, you take a turning that brings you to a street lined with lodging houses. Their doors are narrow, their steps scrubbed but worn. Light seeps through the cracks in a few shutters. In one, you glimpse a narrow bed neatly made despite its threadbare blankets. In another, a table is set with mismatched mugs and plates. In these small spaces, hygiene is a careful balance between what can be done and what must be endured. A quick wash at the basin, a sweep of the floor, a change of linens when water and time allow, it's enough to keep life moving. As you walk, a faint metallic ring carries through the fog. You follow it to find a blacksmith's forge, the door propped open despite the hour. Inside, the fire glows low but steady. Tools hang in tidy rows along the walls, their surfaces dark with soot. A young man stands at the anvil, tapping lightly at a piece of iron, sending up the occasional bright spark. The air smells of hot metal coal and a faint undercurrent of sweat. Here, cleanliness is practical. The tools are kept free of rust. The forge floor swept of dangerous debris, the work itself valued over spotless hands. Beyond the forge, the street bends again toward the river. The smell of damp and salt thickens, carrying with it a note of rot from the day's refuse. The Thames never sleeps. Even now you hear the lap of water against the embankment, the creak of mooring ropes. A barge rocks gently, with the tide its lantern swaying in the dark. The river reflects what it is given: coal dust, ash, fish, scales, bread crusts, and carries it away in its slow, tireless current. For the city, it is both a source of life and a reminder of how closely that life brushes against its own waste. You linger at the embankment for a moment, watching the faint ripples catch the lamplight. Somewhere along the opposite shore, a lone bell rings a slow, deliberate toll that echoes over the water. It feels as though the city is marking time not just in hours, but in its own steady breath. Turning back toward the streets, you pass a coffee stall still serving the last of the night's customers. A cab driver leans against the counter, his coat collar turned high, his gloves worn thin at the fingertips. The stallholder pours steaming liquid into a chipped mug, the scent of strong, bitter coffee cutting through the damp air. The mug is wiped on a cloth and handed over without ceremony. Here the ritual is less about cleanliness than about keeping the cold at bay. You step into a narrow passage where the light is dimmer, the air stiller. The ground is littered with damp straw, perhaps from a nearby stable. The smell of horse and hay is stronger here, almost pleasant after the sharper scents of the river. A stable door stands ajar, revealing a groom leaning against a stall door, speaking softly to the animal inside. The straw underfoot is fresh golden against the shadows. The horse shifts its weight, the sound of hooves muffled by the bedding. Even here, hygiene is carefully tended, not for human comfort, but for the health of the animals that keep the city moving. Emerging from the passage, you find yourself once more among the residential streets. The night feels deeper here, the fog thicker. In the stillness, you notice the small things, a polished doorknob catching the lamplight, a row of boots neatly arranged outside a doorway, a faint wisp of soap-scented steam escaping from a half-open window. These are the signs of lives quietly maintaining their fragile barrier against the city's constant tide of dirt. And as you keep walking, you realize how relentless that effort truly is, how every household, every shop, every street corner is engaged in its own quiet struggle to keep the grime just far enough away to feel human. Tomorrow it will begin again as it has for generations, each act folding into the rhythm of the city. The streets are quieter still now, the fog having thickened into a soft curtain that blurs the lines between lamp and shadow. You move slowly, letting the hush settle into you. Somewhere far off, a carriage wheel clatters over cobblestones, the sound made strange by distance and mist. Most doors are closed now, their latches drawn, but the city is never fully asleep. You pass a narrow doorway where the faint glow of a lamp seeps into the street. Inside, a woman sits at a low table, methodically darning a pair of stockings. Her hands move without hurry, the needle flashing briefly in the lamplight. On the table beside her is a small basin half filled with cloudy water, a cloth draped over its side. She dips the cloth, wrings it out, and wipes the table before setting her work down again. The water will be thrown into the gutter before bed. It's a simple rhythm, tidy wipe put away. Further along, you find a small court tucked between taller buildings. A single lamp burns at its center, its light catching the glisten of wet cobbles. Against one wall stands a line of boots, some neatly paired, others leaning tiredly against each other. Their leather is worn scuffed from long days of work. By morning, most will be brushed polished if there's time. It's not vanity, it's a way of keeping the leather supple, of stretching the life of what is for many their only pair. At the far end of the court, a door swings open to reveal a man carrying a sloshing bucket. He tips it into the drain with a practiced motion, the water splashing high before running off into the dark. The smell rises briefly, soap, coal, ash, and something less pleasant. He wipes his hands on his trousers and disappears inside the door, closing softly behind him. You turn into a lane where the houses seem older, their brickwork pitted and stained by years of smoke and weather. The windows are smaller here, some with shutters closed tight, others bare to the fog. A few have flower pots on the sills, their leaves drooping in the cold. In one, a candle burns low beside a chipped porcelain jug. You imagine it filled earlier from a pump, the water carried up narrow stairs and poured into a basin for the evening wash. Halfway down the lane, a rag-and-bone man pushes his cart with slow determination. The cart is piled high. Broken chairs, old coats, bent iron tools. He stops now and then to peer into a doorway or speak briefly with someone in the shadows. What he takes tonight will be picked over tomorrow, the usable parts salvaged, the rest sold for scrap. His hands are blackened with dirt. His coat smells of damp wood and rust. In his work, there's no separating labor from filth. They arrive and leave together. The lane opens into a broader street where a coffee stall glows under its canvas awning. A cluster of cab drivers stand nearby, their breath clouding the air as they talk quietly. The stallholder pours coffee into thick mugs, the dark liquid steaming in the cold. The mugs are passed from hand to hand, sometimes refilled without washing. A cloth lies folded on the counter, ready to wipe away the worst of the drips. It's enough to keep the night moving. Across from the stall, a stable door is propped open, warm light spilling onto the street. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of hay and horses. A groom leans against a stall, rubbing down a mare with slow, steady strokes. Dust rises from her coat, with each pass catching in the lamplight. Fresh straw lies in neat heaps nearby, ready to be spread for the night. The groom's sleeves are rolled, his forearms dusted with chaff. His hands, though strong, carry the ingrained dark of a trade that no amount of soap can fully remove. You follow the street as it curves toward the market district. By day, this place is alive with voices and motion. Now it's a still life in shadow. Stalls are shuttered carts covered with tarps. The air holds the ghosts of the day's smells, fish onions, fresh bread softened now by the damp. A few stray cats prowl the empty aisles, pausing to sniff at crates or slip between barrels. The cobbles here are darker stained by countless mornings of melted ice and spilled brine. Beyond the market, the river draws closer again. You hear it before you see it, the low, steady lap of water against stone, the occasional groan of a rope pulling taut. The air carries its familiar mingling of salt silt and city refuse. A barge shifts in its moorings, its lantern swaying gently. On the far bank, the faint glow of another street flares briefly before fading back into the mist. Leaning on the embankment wall, you take in the slow, patient movement of the Thames. It swallows the day without complaint, the soot from chimneys, the runoff from gutters, the waste tipped from unseen buckets. Yet it remains the city's lifeline, carrying goods, feeding trade, offering water that will, despite all, find its way into kettles and basins tomorrow. It is both the city's great cleanser and its silent accomplice. You turn away, taking one last walk through the quieter streets. A few windows still glow here and there. In one, a family sits close around a table, their faces lit by the single oil lamp. In another, a solitary figure writes by candlelight, pausing now and then to sip from a cup. The air outside is still broken only by the muffled sound of a dog barking somewhere far off. As you walk, you notice the subtle signs of a city that has prepared itself for another day. Doorsteps swept and scrubbed, buckets stacked neatly by the wall, laundry pegged high to dry in the night air, boots lined by the hearth ready for the morning's polish. These small acts repeated every day keep the tide of grime from flooding in entirely. And it strikes you, this is the heart of Victorian hygiene. Not perfection, not the elimination of dirt, but the constant, quiet negotiation between what can be kept clean and what must simply be endured. Every household fights its own corner against the city's weight, and every morning begins with the same question, how much of yesterday's dirt will we carry into today? The answer, as always, is just enough to remind you where you are. The streets of Victorian London fade behind you now, their lamplight dimming to a soft blur in your mind. The fog, once thick with the scents and sounds of the night, drifts gently away, leaving you in a quieter, slower world. You've walked every kind of street, grand avenues and narrow courts, market squares and shadowed alleys, and each has told you its own story of how life is kept just clean enough to go on. The clink of buckets at a pump, the creak of a crossing sweeper's broom, the soft splash of soapy water poured into a gutter. These small, repeated sounds have been the heartbeat of the city, the music that played under every step you took tonight. You've seen faces bent over basins, hands raw from scrubbing doorsteps, shining faintly in the lamp glow. These are the signs of an endless patient, labor, and understanding that cleanliness is not an end, but a daily act of defiance against the weight of grime. Now the city grows still. The last fires burn low behind curtained windows. Boots are lined neatly by hearths. Linen pegged high in the cold night air sways just enough to whisper its presence. The smell of coal smoke fades into the distance, leaving only a soft memory in the air. You can let your shoulders drop now. You've walked far enough. The night has folded itself around you like a blanket, and the sounds of the city have softened to nothing more than a hum. The work of the day is done. The struggles of tomorrow can wait. Close your eyes. Let the faint rhythm of the gas lamps in the fog guide you deeper into stillness. Victorian London will keep until morning,